We're so glad you tuned in. I pray that you will learn something and be challenged in your faith as we study together today. What does it mean to have a heart after God, or to be called a person after God's own heart? Where did that saying come from anyway? I did a quick search on my phone and I found two verses that have these words. One verse is the Old Testament and the other is in the New Testament. The New Testament verse is actually just quoting the Old Testament. So let's just read where this comes from. It's in Acts 13, verse 22. And when he had removed him, he raised up David to be their king, of whom he testified and said, I have found in David, the son of Jesse, a man after my heart, who will do all my will. So that was Paul talking in the synagogue. He was teaching there, and he was just going over a recap with the people present about Israel's history. He was saying that God was the one who called David a man after his own heart. It's in this recap that he quotes 1 Samuel 13:14. God used the term, a man after my heart. He was the one who started it. He says David was a man after his own heart who would do all of his will. Does that mean David always got it right? That he was perfect? Many of us know the story of David and Goliath and how he slayed the giant. We hear all about the good that David did. But today, I want to look at a story that is of a very dark failure of David. It is in a very painful story that we can find hope for ourselves. The story is found in 2 Samuel 11 and 12. We won't read it all today, but I encourage you to read it on your own. I'll just give you a quick recap of what was going on in the story. David was the king of Israel. God chose him for it. The Lord had given him many victories in war. The Ark of the Covenant had been brought to David's city of Jerusalem. The Ark of the Covenant had been brought to David's city of Jerusalem. This Ark was the manifest presence of God. God dwelt among his people. At the time of year when kings normally go to war, David was at home on his couch. I'm not sure why he wasn't out fighting, but it is the first of many red flags in this story. He saw a woman bathing who was beautiful and lusted after her. At this point, he already had at least 6 wives. Instead of fleeing from temptation, he entangled himself in a huge web of sin. He found out that she was a married woman, married to one of his best warriors, and he was presently out fighting while David was at home. He proceeded to send for her so he could sleep with her. She became pregnant. David tried to cover his sin, but it went from bad to worse. He ended up ordering the murder of her husband, and then he took her to be his wife. God was displeased. He sent Nathan the prophet to tell David of his punishment. This shows that God went to David. Nathan told a story, and in this story he was talking about how there was this rich man who had all the sheep in the world, and then there was a poor man who only had 1 sheep, and this sheep was like the family pet. They even brought the lamb into their house and slept with the lamb in their bed because it was precious and near to this lamb. And that rich man said, I have a friend coming over, I want to eat lamb for supper, go get the poor man's lamb and we'll sacrifice it, we'll cook it up and eat it. David heard that story and he became furious. He demanded justice for the poor man. And Nathan said to David, you are that man. He didn't realize that the story was about him. God then went through a whole list of what he had already done for David. And basically, David's actions said that what you did for me, God, wasn't enough. I want more. David's actions showed that he thought very little about God's commands. Because in this one act, David utterly scorned the Lord, the son of David and his new wife Bathsheba would die, and the sword would never depart from David's family. Conflict was going to be in the family forever. David deserved death. That was the penalty by law in those days. But he acknowledged his sin before God, and God said he has put away his sin and he wouldn't die. I'm learning that God's discipline always is based on the motivation of love. God does what is best for the heart growth of his people. He's not mean and he's not unjust. Can you imagine what the future of David and all of Israel might have been if God didn't expose this sin and deal with it? David and Bathsheba might have had to try and live the rest of their lives trying to hide it, keeping it covered. And anybody who knew the truth would lose respect for David and maybe even God. As I read through Samuel, I'm learning that many of the Psalms are written by David. They give us insight on how he processed the times that we learn about in the books of Samuel. Let's turn to Psalm 51 and read how David processed all of this. It gives us the inside story of what David was thinking after this act had happened. Right in the introduction, it says, to the choir master, a psalm of David, when Nathan the prophet went to him after he had gone into Bathsheba. It shows us right there in the introduction that David is acknowledging his sin. And it also says it's to the choir master. So now it's a congregational song. So this is now a song that is being sung by other people, maybe people who also need to know the forgiveness of God. Let's read Psalm 51 together. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your steadfast love, according to your abundant mercy. Blot out my transgressions. Wash me thoroughly from my iniquity, and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is ever before me. Against you, and you only, have I sinned, and done what is evil in your sight, so that you may be justified in your words, and blameless in your judgment. Behold, I was brought forth in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Behold, you delight in the truth of my inward being, and you teach me wisdom in the secret heart. Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I'll be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones that you have broken rejoice. Hide your face from my sins, and blot out my iniquities. Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away from your presence, and take not your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and uphold me with a willing spirit. Then I will teach transgressors your ways, and sinners will return to you. Deliver me from blood guiltness, O God of my salvation. My tongue will sing aloud of your righteousness. O Lord, open my lips, and my mouth will declare your praise. For you do not delight in the sacrifice, or I would give it. You are not pleased with burnt offering. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit, and a broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise. Do good to Zion in your good pleasure. Build up the walls of Jerusalem. Then will you delight in right sacrifices, in burnt offerings and whole burnt offerings. Then bulls will be offered on your altar. We see that David was not trying to downplay his sin. He's openly honest about it. We see that David knows that God is just. He appeals to his steadfast love and his mercy. God doesn't want lip service or good deeds. He wants a broken spirit and a contrite heart. God doesn't despise brokenness. He doesn't think little of it. If sin breaks our spirit and crushes our heart, and we honestly bring that brokenness to God, He heals. He creates a new heart. He renews a right spirit in us. 1 Kings 11:4-6 says that David's heart was wholly true and wholly followed the Lord his God. David wasn't perfect, but he did wholeheartedly follow after God. When David sinned, he confessed, and he trusted God to forgive him. David knew his heart would only find peace and be complete in the Lord. David knew what it was to be half-hearted and to feel so totally cut off from God that his bones ached. If we know firsthand how ugly our sin is and what it can do, or if we know how dangerous being half-hearted is, it makes the mercy and the steadfast love of God shine brighter. We also grow in compassion for others who struggle with the same things we do. A heart after God isn't a perfect one. It's a wholly devoted one. It's one that recognizes when it does wrong and seeks forgiveness and gets back up and follows wholeheartedly again. A little side note, David and Bathsheba go on to have other children, and it's through this lineage the Messiah comes. All through the Bible, we see God being good to those who don't deserve it. We see Him using messy, complicated, imperfect people for His glory. May we be a people who it can be said of us, we are a people after God's heart, who will do all His will. May God bless you.